makes modal verbs so special? Basically, it's their behavior inside the sentence. They have a special set of rules around them. Let's have a look at those rules. Unlike any other verb, you cannot have any verb before this modal verb, okay? I've used must as an example, okay? Unlike any other verbs, modal verbs, they cannot have another verb before them. So you cannot say, for example, I have musted or he is musting. That's completely wrong, completely ungrammatical. If you need to say something with a modal verb in the past goes after the modal verb, okay? You also can't have the to particle to put this verb in infinitive, okay? They don't have the to particle, so there's no to must or to can. It's must or can. They cannot have an ed ending, so there's no musted or there's no coulded or canned, okay? There's no ed ending. Why not? Because they are irregular. You cannot have the to particle after this verb, okay? So there's no way you can say must to, may to, or can to. There's no way. For modal verbs, it's a no-go. And if you have a verb in the present simple for he, she, or it, remember third person singular in present simple, you cannot have the s ending if you have a modal verb before. For example, I go is present simple, but for her, for him, and for it, you add an s. He goes, she goes, or it goes, but not after must. If you have a must, it's it must go, she must go, they must go. So there's no s ending. You also cannot add this s to this verb, okay? These verbs, you basically can't change them. These are unchangeable. There's 9 of these and you cannot change them. That's very important. And another thing is, when you make a negation with one of these verbs in your sentence, the negative particle, not, or nt contraction, goes after this verb, not after any of the verbs after it, okay? These are the basic rules that mark the behavior of these verbs in a sentence. But what do they mean? Stay with me and we'll find out. Number 1 for you is can. So what do you use can for? What is can? Can is a verb you use for expressing ability mainly, okay? This is the main thing. What is ability? Ability means I can do something. Like, I can talk, or I can swim. Sometimes your ability is something you know how to do. For example, I can read, or I can't read, okay? To say you know how to read, because you know all the letters, is I can read. But also, you can find can used in asking for permission. Like, can I take that? Can I eat that apple? Okay? Or for expressing possibility. Well, it can't happen, for example. This thing you're talking about, it just can't happen. There is no possibility for the thing you're talking about to happen. So can, mainly for ability, but also can be found used for permission and possibility. Number 2, could. Well, could is actually the past form of can. Remember how I told you these verbs are irregular, these modal verbs are irregular? Well, can in its past form is could, okay? So the most obvious meaning of could is to speak about things that were a possibility in the past or abilities in the past. For example, when I was young, I could swim long distances. I could do it then, but I cannot do it anymore. this is an ability I had in the past. Also, possibilities that could happen in the past. For example, it could be that way years ago, but not anymore. Something that was a possibility sometime in the past, but it's not a possibility now, uses this form of can. Could. It could happen back then, but it cannot happen anymore. But it has another meaning. It's used to express possibility or probability right now. For example, if I throw this ball, I could score the point. There's a possibility. I'm not saying I can score the point like I know I can because it's an ability I have. I'm just expressing the possibility. If I throw the ball, I could score a point. And also it's used for suggestions. Suggestions like, you could actually pay attention in class. You might learn something. That's a suggestion I use a lot in my classes. Past form of can, possibility, and suggestions. Number 3, may. And the first time you use may is probably after you knock the door and you ask for permission. You knock the door and you say, may I come in, please? So the most common use of may is to ask for permission. May I come in? May I talk to you, please? You're asking for permission. But there is also another meaning to may, another use of may, which is probability. When I'm talking to my friends and I don't know what I'm going to do this afternoon and I'm just thinking about it and I'm saying, well, you know, I may go to the swimming pool today, or maybe something that may happen, something that has a probability to happen. They may just kick you out if you show up late. For example, they may kick you out. Number 4, might. So the first and most obvious use of might is as a more indirect use of may. So may is a bit more direct, you're asking for permission directly, or you're talking about probability directly. But if you want to be a little bit more polite, you can say, you know, they might not accept you in the class if you come in late. It's a bit more indirect and a little bit more polite use of may, but it's also used for expressing probability. Okay? Number 5 is will. Will is the modal verb we use for future verb tenses, and it basically means future prediction. Okay, so when we're talking about future, you know, you can be speaking as a future prediction or as a future plan. Well, we use will as a future prediction. It doesn't have many more uses than that. Okay, so that one was easy. Just will as a future. Number 6, shall. Okay, shall is probably one of those modal verbs you haven't found much. You haven't come across it much. But shall could also mean the same as will, okay? It could be used to express the future. So, I shall have a sports car one day is a future prediction. It's not certain and it's used instead of will. But also shall is used to express intentions, to say, I shall go and buy some ice cream. Means I intend to go and buy some ice cream later. Or, which it could also mean an offer. Shall I buy you some ice cream? Like, I'm offering you to go and get some ice cream for you. Or it could also be used to ask for advice. For example, what shall I do? Okay? So these are the uses of shall, not many, pretty easy. To express an intention, to make an offer, to ask for advice, sometimes even to offer advice, and for future. You probably won't use it for future because you feel more comfortable with will. Generally, will is just enough for future, so just when you come across this one, just remember intentions and offers. Number 7, would. This one, you probably have seen it many times already. You've probably come across with this one. And would is used very widely to soften requests, to make a request softer, not to be it not to make it sound as an order, go bring me some coffee, you could say, would you bring me some coffee please? Another use of it is to talk about past habits. So you would say, what are past habits? Past habits are things you used to do many years ago. Something repeated but in past. Okay? And you could replace would by used to. You could say, when I was your age, I used to go to the cinema every weekend. Or you could say, when I was your age, I would go to the cinema every weekend. I don't go anymore, but many years ago when I was your age, I would do that very often. So that's another use for would. And obviously conditional, okay? Number 8, we've got should. And should is used mainly to give advice. You should study harder every day. If you want to get better marks, you should study harder. You should go clean your room now. And all that sort of things, okay? Like, you should be quiet in class, you should pay more attention, so on. That's an advice. Also used as suggestion. You should put more sugar in there to make it tastier, or you should stop eating sugar. It's like a suggestion, but there's a very thin line between advice and suggestion, so I wouldn't be brave enough to say where the line is, okay? And then we've got an ideal state of affairs. So I also use should to talk about ideal situations. Like, for example, I should have time to go home and change my clothes before the party. Not that it is a suggestion or an advice, it is the ideal state of affairs. This would be the ideal situation. If there's no traffic jam, I should be able to get home in half an hour, change clothes and be at your party in another half an hour. So that's an ideal state of affairs. I should have enough time to do that. Okay? Number 9, and it's must. And must is used for very strong sentences. It's used for rules, for laws, for obligations in general, and also when you add a not and you make a must not or mustn't, when you contract it, you make a prohibition. So let's give it an example. For example, when a police stops you while you are driving, you must remain in your car and wait for them to get closer and give you the instructions. You must remain in your car. And also, as a prohibition, you must not leave your car after the police stops you. Hold on, we haven't finished yet. Okay? Just yet. I know I told you there's only 9, but I'll give you a little extra. Sometimes people use these as modal verbs, okay? Originally they weren't. I mean, it wasn't, because there's only one in negative and in affirmative, okay? But now it becomes more widely used and people start using needn't and need also sometimes as modal verbs, okay? Just for you to know, you don't have to use them as modals. You can use them as normal verbs. So you could say, I need to go and do something. I need to talk to you. I don't need to talk to you, okay? You can use it as a normal verb. But also, some people use it as a modal verb and they say, you needn't do that, for example, okay? Or, need I do that again? Okay, so some people use them as modals, okay? This is why we've included them, but it's not necessary. You can use them as a normal verb. You can use it because there's only one of it, okay? In negative and in affirmative. So, just that you know, some people will tell you this is a modal, they are not wrong, okay? But it doesn't have to be a modal. Now, semi-modals are a bit different. They are not as fixed as modals, so different grammar books and different textbooks will give you a different list of verbs, which they call semi-modals, And normally we learn them to be able to transform the same information we can express with modals, but in a different verb tense or a different situation. For example, you can't say I musted. Okay, there's no way you can use must in the past. So we transform it into had to, and we have an obligation in the past. Same happens with ability, for example, in the future. You can't say I will can, you will have to change it. How do you change it? Will and can are both modal, you can't use them together, so you will have to find a way around it with will be able to, okay? Those are pretty simple and pretty fixed structures for transforming the information of modal verbs. But there's also some standalone verbs and verb combinations that are sometimes called semi-modals, okay? So one is ought to. Ought to is basically the same as should. It expresses a recommendation, and should is actually more widely used than ought to. But hey, there you have it. Then used to, many grammar books refer to used to as a semi-modal combination or semi-modal verb, and you use it for expressing habits in the past and also past states. Like I used to be very fat many years ago, okay? It's a state, it's not a habit. Then you've got have to, because really have to can also be used instead of must, not only as a transformation for must, but also instead of must. And it gives you a softer rule or a softer obligation, okay? And also, it's very important that you know it, we use don't have to, doesn't have to, or didn't have to express the absence of obligation. So there's no obligation, but it's not a prohibition. Because if you say must not, you are prohibiting. You're saying you must not do it. It means this is prohibited. But if you say you don't have to do it, it means you can do it, but you don't have to. So your choice, it's your choice to do it or not to do it. And then we have these two combinations, had better and would rather. And they are a bit more difficult, they are a bit more phrasal, they are a bit more colloquial, so to say. And this one is used sometimes as a threat or as a strong recommendation. You had better do that, you had better talk to your friends. It's a strong recommendation, sometimes also used as a threat. And this one, I'd rather, is used for expressing a preference. I would rather have less money and live in a more comfortable flat than the other way around. So this is used for expressing a preference. This one is used for giving a strong recommendation. Also sometimes like a bit of a threat, but not a real threat. Okay? So I hope it makes a bit more clear for you what semi-modal verbs are and how to use them. And just remember, there's not a really fixed list, okay? Because sometimes you find them organized differently, and some of them will not be called semi-modal verbs, okay? But it's a verb combination or just a verb we use to transform modals and also to express some of the things we can also express with modals, but we would prefer to use these ones just because they give us a slightly changed taste to that information.